Chapter 8. We're going to, I would say, move through this chapter relatively quickly. Y'all remember how many days, based on the counting of, the totality, how many days we're looking at that Noah and his family were on the ark? 371 days, based on the numbers that we find in the text. And so I kind of made the point last week, we often tell our kids that it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. And while that's not wrong, there's a whole lot more to the flood than that. So it might be good to be a little more specific on that when we're teaching our children, to impress on them the magnitude of this event. This isn't, the Noahic flood isn't just a neat children's story. This is a significant historical event, and it occurred because of God's judgment against sin. So we need to teach it properly. As you get to chapter 8, God remembers Noah. I think I said something about this last week. The word remember. That word remember in the Hebrew is used a few times in your Old Testament, and it's an action term, it's a verb, and that's what it means. God took action. God acted on behalf of Noah. And the way that occurs is, you get down to verse 2, the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain of heaven was restrained. And the waters returned from off the face of the earth continually, or from off the earth continually. And after the end of 150 days, the waters were abated. They were going down that whole time. And so, the flood event in and of itself is now over. We're going to talk about, as you can see here, the geologic evidence for the flood. Some pretty interesting stuff. I've got some pictures and things we're going to look at. So verses 1 through 12 basically is the decrease of the flood. I just noted the action of verses 1 through 3, God's action, not just remembering Noah, but it seems his action in the decreasing of the flood as well. The ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. This is the level to which Bible skeptics will stoop. They'll say, there's no way that thing was big enough to land on more than one mountain. And the Bible says mountains. I drove through the Rocky Mountains a couple years ago. Does that mean I hit every possible section of the Rocky Mountains to get where I was going? Or is that just a way of saying we saw the Rocky Mountains and we drove, in that general vicinity? And we understand how language works, but people they'll try to grab anything to criticize the biblical text. Well, it did rest on one of the mountains in Ararat. Whatever that means, wherever that was, we don't know. Verses 13 and 14 talk about the drying of the earth. Came to pass in the 601st year, in the 1st month and the 1st day of the month. The waters were dried up from off the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark. Remember, he was told to build the ark, put rooms in it, and cover the ark with pitch, within and without. Whatever this covering was, I don't know precisely, but he takes it off and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. And the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, so this is 57 days. 57 days have passed total at this point. The 27th day of the month, the earth was dried. Go forth from the ark. So you've got the decrease of the flood, you've got the drying of the ark, and then verses 15 through 19, everybody leaves the ark. Verse 18, Noah went forth, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. 8 souls were saved by water, we are told in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 20. Well, the getting on point versus the getting off point. If you go back to chapter 7, let me see here. Well, we have chapter 7, verse 7. They go into the ark. And then you get to chapter 7 and verse 11, the 600th year of Noah's life, the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month. all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. I mean, that's the closest we have. Well, and of course, the getting off point here is what we just read, beginning in chapter 8 and verse 15. Is that?
I was just curious if it was anywhere closer, if Noah would even been able to recognize anything from before versus after.
Got you.
The mountains might have somewhat been the same, but not sure.
You know, I meant to do this before I left the house and I forgot. Okay, the theory of continental drift. Let's run through this real quick. How far do y'all remember the continents we're told, are the continents moving per year? You guys? 4 centimeters per year. So somebody get your phone out, or maybe you find out how far the east coast of the United States is from, what would we say, the west coast of Europe, I guess? See how far apart that is, and try to figure out how many years it would take. If it's 4 centimeters per year, how many years would it take to do that? Anybody want to jump on that one? Well, that's why they say billions. I'm just curious. Like I said, I meant to do it before I left the house. And to Europe.
From New York to London.
Okay, that'll be good round numbers.
It's about 3,400 miles.
Okay, 3,400 miles. Centimeters. Jay, you're the math guy. Come on, man. Well, I'm just curious to see if so, because we're talking about Darwinian evolution teaches us that this idea of uniformitarianism. Uniformitarianism is a fancy word, basically meaning nothing like Noah's flood has ever happened. There has been no worldwide catastrophe. And so continental drift, of course we talk about Pangaea, what is that? What's Pangaea? The supercontinent. Well, now we are no longer a supercontinent, so how long did it take? If it's 4 centimeters per year and you're 3,400 miles apart, how many years did that take?
This says 3,400 miles is about 550 million centimeters.
550. Do what? 200 million. Now that's not even close to. Well, the universe is 4.6 billion years old. What about Earth itself? Anyway, let's give it 200 million, Colin. That's what you said? 200 million years. Okay, so that's not inaccurate necessarily in regard to the Darwinian timeline. Do you guys remember the period of time from the creation to the flood if we follow the biblical timeline? Approximately how many years are between the creation and the flood? precisely, according to the biblical genealogies, 1,656 years. So what is that in comparison to 200 million years? If again, the theory of evolution is true and continental drift, 4 centimeters per year is true, that is quite, they're not anywhere in the same ballpark, are they? So, I don't know, that's just interesting to me. We're given these, well, okay, so think back to creation. Are those days literal 24-hour periods of time? We answered that question when we were going through Genesis chapter 1. They have to be. Not only because of the way the grammar is there in in Genesis chapter 1, but also how that word day is used throughout the rest of Scripture. Well, the rest of the Old Testament, the Hebrew word yom, Y-O-M, is day. And I asked that question last week. Why would we not take this literally? Well, because evolution. Because science. That's what we're told. So it's interesting to make these comparisons, but then some of the stuff we're going to look at tonight, I think, some of the pictures that I have for you, to me, are the evidence is too overwhelming of a young earth and of catastrophism, which we'll talk about that word in just a minute. Anyway, any other questions or comments on all of that? Mm-hmm.
Vegetation, I'm sure it would have been gone, it would have been dead. I just wonder if they had to wait a normal proper amount of time for that to return naturally, or if something, or if God kind of just made it livable again.
I don't know.
I don't know if you've ever seen a lake that they drained that had been a lake for a long time.
Yeah.
There ain't much at the bottom that would keep anything hot in terms of livestock or human.
Mm-hmm. That's a question I can't answer. Just don't know.
I feel like it would have been a pretty barren wasteland, I feel, at the moment that the water was seeping.
Well, and that's kind of where we were talking about. Was it Joe? You mentioned what would Noah have even recognized the land masses around him? I don't think so. And we're going to look at some stuff here in just a little bit. I think it would have been So in 2 Peter 3, when Peter's talking about the flood, of which the scoffers are willingly ignorant, they said all things continue the same from the beginning of creation. That's uniformitarianism. They're willfully ignorant of some things, that the world that then was perished, being overwhelmed with water. So there's no question in my mind, there were some significant changes to the land. And I would say probably also to the water, the bodies of water too. Oh yeah, they had to put food on the ark too. Who? Yeah. And it says, the text says, a freshly plucked olive leaf. He didn't find it on the ground. So there had to be some time between, because it says when they got off the ark, the earth was dried. Well, the earth can be wet and things still grow. We just don't know the period of time and what it exactly looked like when it did happen. 3 weeks, yeah. 21 days.
It started raining, the flood started until they got off of the ark and had the olive branch and the dove mount. Was not more than a year and a half, was it?
No.
It was less than a year and a half. And, I mean, we burned off some land a while back, and, it totally destroyed everything it seemed like on the ground. And a year and a half, less than a year and a half, is not anywhere near like a lake bed that's been there for 40, say, 100 years. It's dead. Everything in that bottom of that lake is dead. But a year or so would not kill all the seeds and
the seed, and that's what I was getting ready to go into a little bit, kind of looking towards Forrest's question, the seed. So I don't think, and I kind of said this in connection with the flood last week, I'm of the view that I don't think there's anything necessarily miraculous about the flood itself. And I know others say, well, it had to be miraculous. Okay, that's fine. But I would say the same is true in terms of the recovery of the earth after the flood, because you go back to creation, and that's when God set in order, each seed shall produce after its own kind. He did His miraculous creation one time and set in order the laws of nature. And from that point forward, the laws of reproduction, let's say it that way. From that point forward, that's how it's operated. So, I guess that's the answer. God's laws worked. Here's what I want somebody to do. Read verses 20 through 22, and then we're going to move on through our outline here. Genesis 8, 20 through 22.
And they say time causes cold, heat, during summer, day and night shall not cease.
All right, a couple of interesting things here. Number one, this is the first time an altar is mentioned in Scripture. Now, we know that Abel offered of animals, but this is the first time an altar for sacrifice is mentioned. But then secondly, you've got this promise in verse 21, there's not going to be another event like this. So that's your first bullet point here underneath. Because one of the arguments is, well, yeah, there have been great floods, and whatever this is of, if Noah was even a real person, you know, it was just a localized flood somewhere in Mesopotamia. Well, if that's the case, if Noah's flood was local, that's your next blank here, then God has broken this promise of verse 21 many times, hasn't He? I mean, think about, and I know this is I guess you might say a bit different, but think about the tsunamis that we've seen and what they've done. That's water destroying a lot of earth and life, and floods too. But there is no way, if you take the biblical text as historical events, historical characters, historical places, there's no way this can be a localized flood. All right? And then the third thing, and this is in verse 22. First time you read about this in the text. What you tell me, what am I picking out of verse 22? Based on everything we've read up to this point in the book of Genesis, what do you see new? The seasons. Because you go back to Genesis chapter 2, when you have the description of the Garden of Eden, and, well, what verse is it? Here it is. Genesis 2 and verse 5, before any plant of the field was formed, God caused a great mist to come up from the earth. And we talked about this last week, and then back in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, this idea of what's called a water vapor canopy. And even evolutionists believe that there, at one time in our history, although they work on a completely different timeline, that there was a barrier of water vapor around the earth that is no more. And so, well, you have that now. That's gone away. And so that's going to take away what you might call, I guess in one way you could frame that, if that's the way you want to say it, is like insulation. The environment is completely changed now because of a lack of that water vapor canopy. Remember in Genesis 1, God created the waters on the earth, He created the firmament, and He created the waters above the firmament. Well, if that waters above the firmament is gone now, and the earth is rotating on its axis, and it's orbiting at a certain speed, and different parts of the earth are more in the sun for periods of time during the year and less towards the sun, you've got seasons. There's no longer a uniform, climate. It's going to change now. And so as long as the earth stands now, God says, seed time and harvest, cold and heat. And some of the pictures I'm going to show you are going to show you that there was an event, that when that event happened, there was a universal climate on the earth. Same temperature everywhere. The evidence is abundant for that. Summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. All right. Any questions on the text of chapter 8 itself?
Did daylight and darkness change also, or was it always day and night?
Yeah, it's from creation, it's always been day and night.
I know he mentioned it there, and I figured
Yeah.
that's not changing either.
No. And I mean, and there was seed time and harvest too. It's a way of saying the same thing a few different ways. That the earth is going to continue, and well, until God decides it won't.
Mary, I know this is my speculation, but okay, so if we think Pangea existed before there was a flood, and then because of the flood and the pressure of the water and everything, that it separated everything and caused, there is an ocean floor, so even before you had Pangea, maybe water on the rest of the earth, there's still an ocean floor.
Mm-hmm. Ocean floor, yeah.
And then, so when it separated, then that really changed because we have continents on totally opposite sides of the globe.
Yeah.
So that alone would have changed how the seasons and stuff work.
Oh, sure. Currents. Yeah.
More uniform.
Yes.
Now everything's got Antarctica, everything's got
Definitely. Well, okay, so think about hurricanes, all right? So we lived in Pensacola for almost 8 years, and every one of those storms formed in the same place. Now, some of them took a little bit different track, but they always form off the west coast of Africa. Has a lot to do with your water, has a lot to do with water temperatures, your wind currents. When they would hit, if they would come into the Gulf of Mexico, you know, they'd come around the end of Florida into the Gulf of Mexico. If that water's, I don't remember the degree, 85 degrees, 90 degrees, whatever, those storms would just explode, get massive. You think of, what was it? Was it Ivan? Like back in 2007 or so? Anyway, it's like the warmer that water temperature is, it's traveled all the way across the Atlantic building strength, and then it hits warm water, and then it just multiplies sometimes. So yeah, if all those continents were together, which, again, when you trace the fossils from continent to continent, they fall on the same line. The layers of sediment, if you put them back together, hypothetically, the layers of sediment follow the same line where the continents naturally meet. The mountain ranges, everything, yes. It's like a gigantic puzzle piece. We're going to look at some pictures here in just a minute on that too. All right, the New Testament, back to our outline here, the second bullet point. The New Testament uses cataclysmos. There's a word that does mean flood in the Greek. And they don't use that for this particular event. They use the word cataclysmos. What is that? Cataclysm. This is not a small event. It means an inundation. What's it mean when you're inundated with something? You're covered up with it. Deluge is another term. Things changed. All right, you've got 8:22. Now you've got, again, cold and heat, summer and winter. Chapter 9, verses 13 and 14. What does God put in the cloud post-flood as a sign of the covenant? The rainbow. Somebody read chapter 9 and verse 2. Something else changed after the flood. Okay, now you've got a different relationship between man and beast. And, no, thankfully. Okay, somebody says I am echoing. Hopefully that's straightened out. I don't know. I don't have my cans up here. All right, so you've got all those things that have changed. Another thing that has changed, the lifespans have decreased rapidly after the flood. Do you guys remember, I told you last week, what is the average age of the patriarchs excluding Enoch? You guys remember that number? 912. Well, they begin to decrease rapidly and immediately after the flood, by the way. Many biblical authors write about the flood and Noah. This is not an insignificant event. So, Tammy, in terms of the ocean floor and stuff like this, just by way of example, and I think this has part to do with the fountains of the deep being opened, the separation of the supercontinent, if you will. The Mariana Trench is the deepest part of the ocean. It's out near Guam, and it's 6.8 miles deep. That's just unimaginable to think about water being 7 miles deep. And the highest point, of course, is Mount Everest, 5.5 miles high. So that is quite a, 13 miles difference from the highest to the lowest. So when you go back to the original creation, account, the waters are gathered into one place and the dry land is gathered into one place. But now you have all of these cataclysmic events, these catastrophes that are happening here. So what I want to do is show you some images, and it may, it's a little darker up here tonight. Got some bulbs out, so maybe that'll help you. But geologic evidence for the flood. So I've got 4 slides with several pictures on each. Number 1 down here at the bottom, sea creature fossils high above sea level. That's your first blank down there at the bottom. Sea creature fossils high above sea level. All right, so your first image, these are from the Rocky Mountains. You've got I'd say that's a clam. It's what it looks like. I've got that picture, and I mean there are many, many more. You got these in the Rocky Mountains. Sea life. Fossilized sea life. That's from the Rocky Mountains. If I am not mistaken, I think this one is from the Himalayas, which, isn't Everest in the Himalayas? I think it is. But anyway, that's that fossil. All right, tell me what happens. Let's say an animal dies just on its own. It's out in the world, and it just falls over and dies. What is the process that happens? Well, it begins to decompose. Typically, around here, okay, you see an armadillo smashed in the road. What do you see around the armadillo? You got birds picking at it, and other scavengers might. Okay, so what do you notice about this fossil? It is complete. I mean, you've got everything there. And there are even fossils that have been dug up of animals with food in their belly. The complete fossilization of this animal with whatever it just ate inside its stomach. This had to be a rapid burial. This didn't happen like I was just describing, like something today dies and it takes, I don't know how long it would take for an animal today to die and then completely fossilize. But the fossil evidence points to rapid death and rapid burial. This didn't take a long period of time. That's just more, I think these are from the Himalayas too. And anyway, it's amazing stuff. So secondly, this is plant evidence for the flood. And that's number 2, the rapid burial of plants and animals. Like I said, this could not have taken a long time, the way these things are fossilized. And you've seen a couple of these pictures before, but some of these are from the Rocky Mountains. I think that fern was found in the Rocky. Okay, so what happens climate-wise as you get higher and higher in elevation? It gets colder. You go, like we went to the Great Sand Dunes in New Mexico. No, where was it? Colorado. We went to the Great Sand Dunes, and way off in the distance is the snow-capped Rocky Mountains. And we are down here in the sand dunes wearing shorts and T-shirts playing in water. Snowmelt water, by the way. So, you understand how that works. Well, they're recovering completely, perfectly fossilized ferns from the tops of mountains. All right? All right, number 3 here, rapidly deposited sediment layers. This is a really interesting study, and I've talked to the elders about this, and we're going to do this when we finish the first 11 chapters of Genesis. We're going to have a movie night here at the church building. Actually, we're going to have a couple movie nights. These videos are not done by members of the church, but they're done by scientists who consider themselves to be Christians. One of them is called Genesis History, and then the other one is something about after the flood. And it is amazing stuff. And when we plan that, we'll plan it out in advance, and you need to mark it down, and you need to be here. It's amazing. All right, rapid burial evidence for the flood. You've got complete fossilization of large animals. All right? Everywhere. Again, this is all over the earth. This isn't here and there unique finds. You even have in the United States, out in the West, Utah, Montana, you have what they call dinosaur graveyards. Not just a fossil here or a bone here, complete animals that were rapidly buried and fossilized, and mass amounts of animals. All right? That one's hard. Can y'all see that one? That one's amazing. You guys know what that animal is? There are some Christians who don't believe that dinosaurs existed. You know what? Pterodactyl. Yeah. Folks, dinosaurs were real. They really existed. We have the fossils. The evidence is there. All right, sediment layers. Yeah, okay, this is number 3, sorry. Rapidly deposited sediment layers across massive areas. And like I said, if you had the ability to put the continents back together, you could see the continuity, these words are closely related, the continuity among the continents of these sediment layers and fossil layers. Of course, you've got the Grand Canyon. I don't know how many of you have been there, but you can see the layers of sediment in the Grand Canyon. It's quite amazing to see that. Different types of stone. I think, if I remember correctly, I'm trying to think back to the video that I watched, I think the very base layer is called Tapete limestone. And it covers most of the United States of America. But it's completely visible there in the Grand Canyon. Here's something that's really interesting. Okay, so rocks. Rocks are typically hard, aren't they? Have you ever tried to bend a rock? What happens if you try to pick up a rock? Well, you might, if it's thin enough and small enough, you'll break it. But one of the things, and this is a picture from the Grand Canyon, one of the things that you see, you notice how the layers are wavy? And then over here on the right-hand side, they go up at actually more than a 90-degree angle. They're wavy, and then they go back up in this direction, and it's continuous. They're not broken layers. And so you've got this massive amount of erosion as the flood is decreasing, and the ground is shifting constantly, laying down different layers, running into each other, and you've got bends in rock that go up at 90 degrees. It's just, and again, in the second video, it's not the one on is Genesis history, it's on the flood. They go into great detail. I mean, they're right there. Well, you can see the guy. I don't know if you can see him, but he's right here. And so you can see how massive that formation is. All right, so, well, that was number 4, folded sediment layers. Sorry about that, folded sediment layers. Rocks don't bend, but ground that is wet, saturated, as it's settling down, it goes in those different directions and it solidifies. Again, everything is happening rapidly. And that's why you have the amazing record of fossilization, both of plants and animals. Any questions or comments on any of that? You know, we're told that the Grand Canyon, again, if you've been there, was formed over millions of years from erosion and things like this. I've actually been down to the Colorado River. I hiked down all the way in one year and all the way back out. And looking at all of the evidence, not just from the Grand Canyon, but from around the world, there's no way that an honest person who surveys the evidence can look at the Grand Canyon and say, yeah, the Colorado River did that. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's seems like I remember something like 283 miles from one end to the other. And at points, it's well over a mile deep, 10 miles wide, I think at its widest point. That is a catastrophic event that caused that. That is no localized flood. That's not the Colorado River, it's not nearly as big and as much volume as the Mississippi River. I guess it would be the same kind of time framing as like the 4 centimeters per year of continental drift, kind of the same way of figuring how long it would take to do that. It's either that, or you have this biblical account of a cataclysm that would cause massive flooding, massive erosion, changes in the environment, changes in weather. There are a couple of different possibilities, and only one of them is probable. And it's not evolution. It's not the evolutionary timetable. It doesn't work. And there's no evidence. And that's one of the things that really drives me crazy about the theory of evolution is there's something always missing. You know, they call Christians, they say that we serve the God of the gaps. In other words, if there's something in nature that you see that you can't explain, well, you just shove God in that gap. And they're actually accusing Christians of doing what they themselves do. Because you're supposed to have all of these transitionary fossil or transitionary, what's the word? Creatures that show our development from a simple single-celled organism into what we are today. The only problem is that there is no evidence for that. That's the only problem. But that's fact. That's what we're told to accept as fact. And so it's kind of insane how they put on the Christian falsely what they themselves believe in terms of a lack of evidence. All right. Any questions or comments on Genesis 8? Yeah, the Big Bang, bang it. Yeah, that's the explanation. That is true. No, definitely. And a lot of, yeah, because I mean that's when to me it was. Have you been to? Anybody in here been to Yellowstone and watched Old Faithful? Okay. To me, that would be on an extremely minor scale of the fountains of the great deep blowing up. But that would be happening all over instead of just that one location. That's something, Old Faithful is something to see, but it's nothing compared to what happened in the flood.
We almost have to remember too that if God, and I would say this is part of a miracle type of thing, when He opened up the earth to flood, you know, He did something to make it all open up and rain. That would be a miracle. Do you agree with that? But then He had to shut it up again, which
Yeah.
might explain why you have Grand Canyons and Mariana Trenches, and, you know, He shut it back up.
Yeah.
But it was 6 miles deep.
It was totally different than when it started.
But He had to shut it.
Yeah. Okay, guys, thank you.